So the two examples I want to use today are Uber and Airbnb. And the reason is just because, one, these are two companies that are going to be familiar to a lot of people. And number two, I can kind of use this to illustrate the point I'm trying to make while pointing out the inherent hypocrisy of the whole situation at the same time. So the first thing to notice here is not just what the politicians want to do to limit these companies, but the reasons why. So, for example, with Uber, one of the things that they want to do is Uber is essentially beating out the well-known yellow cabs in New York City. It's pretty much a known thing. They're a lot better in terms of getting a ride sooner, having an overall better experience than riding in a cab. There's a lot more credibility to each individual driver, and the prices are better. But because of this, there's a lot of unions like the TLC and the various taxi unions in New York City are very, very powerful, and they want to limit Uber because they want to go back to their old practices of essentially being able to dip their hand in the cookie jar and influence politicians, and they don't want to have to make their business better. They don't want to have to improve it. They just want to keep jacking their rates up every now and then, making more money, not improving, and just kind of sitting there fat and happy, not really helping anybody out. I'm going to be harping on this point a little bit more. But the first thing to look at is there is a proposed bill in which Uber could only increase the number of vehicles they have by 1%. Now, this is very silly for anybody who kind of understands how economics functions. The reasons that the city is using to do this, they're trying again to kind of and maybe they'll be able to get away with this in New York City, but they're trying to capitalize on people's sort of surface level examination of these topics. And the reasons that they're using are they're saying, one, this is going to cause a lot of congestion in terms of traffic, and number two, it's going to cause a lot of pollution. In reality, both of those things in a free market system would not be the case. If we were actually in a free market, what would happen is Uber and the yellow cabs and any other taxi services that want to pop up would be competing with each other. There is only a set amount of business in terms of transporting people around New York. Now, it might be quite large in terms of the market. In a place like New York, there's a ton of people that need rides around, so it's going to be a large number of vehicles, but nonetheless, it is only a number, and it's sort of a fluctuating number that's somewhat fixed at the same time. And each company, whether it's Uber or the cabs or whoever else, Lyft, any of these other companies, they're all just going to get a piece of the pie. And the size of that slice of the pie is going to be determined based on how well they run their business. So if Uber just keeps adding, driver after driver, car after car, the growth in their base of drivers is not inherently tied to the growth in their business. It is only tied to the extent that they're able to successfully grow it. Now, at a certain point, even if the company was perfectly well run, better well run than it is now, you can only essentially capitalize on so much demand. There is only so much demand to go around. This is the same as, if you were opening up a Walmart. A store like Walmart is, typically successful, but you can't just open 6 Walmarts next to each other because 5 are going to go out of business. This is the same as Uber. They might be adding a lot of vehicles now because they're still kind of in the early days of their business. There's still a lot of improvements going on, and then you've got, yellow cabs kind of dropping out. So I think in a real market situation, what would be happening is companies like Uber are going to be jumping in. There's going to be new companies that jump in too. And the number of vehicles in a given area is going to just fluctuate between companies rather than just rising overall. Because eventually they're going to hit sort of a cap, sort of a ceiling of how far they can go. And we can't just add, a million Uber cars and then a million Lyft cars and then a million more cabs. The size of the driver base does not just necessarily correlate to larger business. So the point here is they need to let these things work themselves out. there would be essentially a self-regulating system in which the amount of business available dictates the driver base. Um, Again, it's just like any other business. People are becoming Uber drivers because there's not enough Uber drivers, and they can still make a good living doing it. If you lived in a small town, the amount of Uber drivers would probably be very, very small, and there might not even be a local taxi service. Likewise, if you lived in a small town, there aren't going to be, 10 pizzerias. There might be two. There aren't going to be, 10 bars and restaurants. There might be three or four. This is really the same as Uber. It would just be on a larger scale. So I think that these claims made by politicians, that's the other side of this that you have to examine. I mean, at least Uber and these people are making efforts to use more environmentally friendly vehicles, more modern vehicles. The taxis that you see are often older and run down. I will guarantee you that the average Uber vehicle emits less toxic chemicals into the air than the average yellow cab. And therefore, I believe that if a larger percentage of the overall driver base in New York were Uber or Lyft drivers, we would be overall better in terms of environmental pollution. So that whole factor is really just, de Blasio and those guys trying to harp on your heartstrings because, a lot of people are Democrats in New York, and if they hear that they're destroying the environment, they're very, very likely to sort of want to jump on the bandwagon. Let's go to the next link here, guys. Let's see how long it takes my computer. Wow, not that long. So the other thing going on here on the economic side that I wanted to point out is essentially you have Uber being able to lower their rates over time. Now, this is something which, if you're used to public transportation, and I realize that yellow cabs are not really public transportation, they're sort of like somewhere in between, like a privately run company and a public company. We're all used to the rates going up, 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 up constantly. And this is whether you're going in cabs or if you take a train to work or any kind of transportation like that. You're just so used to prices going up. And to me, it highlights the inefficiencies of these companies and how badly they're run. And it goes to show that not only are they poorly run, but the capability to be a well-run business and to have a business which is competitive while still being able to offer rates which are getting lower and lower is possible. It's not the fault of just, gas prices. They love to use that excuse. It's not the fault of this or that. These businesses are just so poorly run. The unions are keeping everything so stifled in terms of being able to grow the business efficiently. And there's so many hands in the cookie jar because of the unions and the politicians that the rates, of course, have to go up. And companies like Uber, which are running a lean operation, are able to lower their rates because they're actually being competitive, because they're actually trying. So again, it kind of highlights that we could have had this all along. And what we need are companies like Uber and Lyft competing with each other openly because it's only going to benefit us as the consumers, and it's going to force them to run more efficient, leaner companies. Now that helps them economically. It helps them make a better business, make more money so they can hire more people, help more people out. They're going to want to run a leaner operation. So again, an efficient number of vehicles, not too many, not too much traffic, not too much pollution. They already have a modern vehicle fleet. So again, the problems that are being highlighted would be taken care of if we could just let this stuff work itself out. Again, I read these ridiculous quotes. I mean, think about this. Uber wants to monopolize taxi service and destroy drivers in the process. Are you kidding me? The yellow cabs are trying to monopolize it. They're the ones trying to pass laws to limit Uber. It's not about a monopoly. The monopoly is what they want. That's what their union wants because they're so used to not having any competition. What's happening is they're forcing them to actually run a business like grown men. That is what's going on here. What we need to see is that the real monopoly was what was taking place until Uber and Lyft came, not what's happening now. That is not a monopoly, that's competition. Well, welcome to the ball game, you guys. I mean, the rest of us out there have to fight for our jobs. We have to fight for positions, and we have to fight for wages. We don't just get to go to the union and say, oh, we're not going to vote for you this time if you don't let us have our free money, at the expense of the rest of us. It's horrible. So, fair is fair. Make them have to improve just like we have to improve. Um, Again, guys, we have, some more articles here. We're talking about startups, things like that. Um, you know, Airbnb is the second example that I wanted to talk about because just a few days ago, there was some legislation which was passed in relation to Airbnb, and it was actually this legislation in New York City that caught my eye that made me want to basically make this video in the first place. But I thought that mentioning Uber was a good idea because this is, of course, an ongoing battle. This was a nice article from insurancejournal.com, talking about the difference between the arguments of the two sides, talking about whether Uber is destroying or creating jobs. I mean, I think it's just such a ridiculous argument. It's absolutely insane. And most people can kind of see right through this. Now, Airbnb, what's going on here is there's a law that was passed in New York essentially saying that if you don't live in your house while you're renting it out to people for shorter than a 30-day period of time, it's illegal. So in other words, if you're renting out your house for a weekend on Airbnb to some guy, you need to be living there during that time. Otherwise, they're essentially saying that you're operating like a hotel out of your house illegally. Now, things like this get kind of tricky because I understand that there needs to be some element of, I guess I would say, like safety for the renters. I mean, people don't want to be renting and then ending up in a tenement house or something where some guy has an apartment and he's trying to turn it into a hotel out of Airbnb. But again, I think this is the kind of thing that would take care of itself because Airbnb is kind of like Yelp in the sense that you have a lot of reliability where people, can kind of rate each other and chat. And, if a property owner were doing practices that were making the renters feel uncomfortable or unwelcome or seem like something, amoral was going on, I think that person would be quite unable to rent their home. And again, the system would be able to figure itself out. So if you read more into this, you're just going to find that, who does it come down to? Well, it's the hotel lobbies. A lot of hotel and entertainment lobbyists are realizing that, they're losing money. They've been raising rates, and all of a sudden these people are their competition. So again, what's kind of messed up here is this isn't really the issue of operating an illegal business out of your house. This is the government essentially telling you what you can do or who can stay in a home that you own, that you are inside of. You are renting it, you are, the owner. I mean, you can't just like rent something and then, not as the owner rents it out. I realize that, but they're telling you what you can do with your own property. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. And again, the excuses are kind of crazy. You can see how it's essentially just like another cash grab. It's basically just these unions trying to get rid of competition because hotels keep raising their rates over and over again, and we're in New York City. And it's kind of a double-sided coin, guys, because on the one hand, you have to realize a lot of the people that are doing Airbnb, and I know some people personally that do it in New York, they do it to pay the ridiculous, taxes and to pay the ridiculous mortgages they have. And they're really just trying to offset the expenses that the government locally has imposed on them. So it's kind of ironic that a lot of people started doing Airbnb literally just to help pay extra taxes on their property because of the government. And now here comes the government saying, you can't do that to make extra money to pay our taxes because of our laws, because these unions are, donating to our election campaigns. So once again, the whole evil circle of government and corporations kind of getting together and saying, not only can you not use your own know-how, your own wit, and your own home to pay taxes that we've imposed on you, but you have to be subject to these poor business practices anytime that you yourself want to go and utilize a hotel or something like that. They're really just trying to limit the ability of their own constituency to get by. They want all economic activity to be done on their terms, and they want to make sure that they get their little slice of the pie every time. They want all the tax dollars, they want all the election dollars they can get. And if these unions are saying, hey, you know, we can't make as much money if these people are operating quote unquote illegal hotels, which is ridiculous, then they would rather spend their money to buy politicians than to improve their hotels. That's kind of the last point I want to make. Instead of these companies, instead of these unions spending all this money to buy these politicians, why don't they use that money to improve their business? Why don't they use that money to make their employees' lives better so that their business is reflective of their employees' will? And all of a sudden, maybe they could be not only improving and competing with companies like Uber and Airbnb, but maybe people will actually want to work for them. Maybe they can actually get some better workers, and maybe they'll actually be able to compete. But instead of wanting to improve their business, instead of wanting to do what everybody else has to do, they would rather spend no effort at all, cut a big fat check to the politicians, and just say, make my competition illegal. I don't want to fight. I don't want to have to, go out there and pound the pavement and make my business better. I just want to buy the politicians and make them do it for me. And this is what goes on at all levels of business, guys. This is what happens in pharmaceutical industry, defense, everything out there. We need to get rid of the government, get rid of the unions, make business be business. Business needs to compete with itself. It needs to be self-regulating, and we need to realize that what happens is businesses don't avoid the rules when there aren't regulations. Regulations are the response to the businesses not wanting to compete and wanting to just buy government as opposed to improve themselves. So that's your thought for the day, guys. We'll talk soon.